Hey, this is David with Hagerty in our Redline rebuild series. Today we're working on our 37 Ford race car. And if you remember from our last episode with the race car, we finished up putting our shock brackets in and getting our shocks located. We made our box here so we could hold, or I should say support brackets so we can hold our fuel cell. And then we also have our battery box in position and it's adjustable. And you can see I have a 3D printed battery sitting in there that gives us some spatial position. Over here is our finished product as far as the fuel cell container. So the plastic bladder has to set into this metal container. That's from a safety standpoint for poking holes in it and such. Now, going through some of the comments, I see that some people really have some concerns about how I've mounted the shocks. So I'm just going to address this real fast. This is a 37 Ford race car to go in circles. Now, Doc Hudson in cars actually said a true statement. You have to turn right to go left. Now, you also set up the suspension to only go left. So don't get all excited that the shocks aren't how they look like on your cruiser, daily cruiser. They're not going to. Yes, I have them flipped from normal as far as your street car is concerned. They will seal regardless. They will work in the same manner regardless because the valving is compression versus extension. It doesn't matter which direction they're flipped. So that's cleared up. We're going to move along. Front end is today's project. So on the front end, it is a mishmash of all kinds of stuff. Again, to reiterate before, this front clip, if you will, the frame, is off a 55 Chevrolet. Virtually everything else appears to be from a 37 Ford, similar to the body. Now, given that, I have ordered 37 Ford kingpins, and as you will see, my 37 Ford kingpins will not fit my thinking 37 Ford spindles. Going back to the drawing board, it appears that these may be truck spindles. I really don't care because I'm just going to get kingpins that are long enough to extend past the bushing at least. Now, also you'll notice two different spindles or appearing spindles. For whatever reason, they went to a wide 5 hub or this better bearing. It used larger bearings and it uses a different hub. It's an aftermarket Franklin hub. And it uses these spindles. Now you can see what they did is they took this spindle, the sleeve here, and stuck it on the factory spindle. And on this side, they welded everything up. For whatever reason, I'll say they ran out of time. On this other side, it slips over and then was bolted down. Now, the pattern doesn't exactly line up. You'd use a smaller bolt, so on and so forth. There's no real need for this to be interchangeable. So at the end of the day, I'm going to weld it up as well. And then you can also see that the steering rod has been modified to some extent. So it's not only gusseted, and that helps stiffen things. You can see it's been done here as well. Now on this side, you can see it also has a hole added. And we'll get into that as we go along because you'll see that there's a lot of things that are different than stock. For instance, Henry Ford did not build his tie rod assemblies out of square tubing and then weld it to a cast iron piece. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with this. What I want you to keep in mind, in the day when they were building this, you could not go to a company such as, and I'll plug them, All Star Performance, because they're huge in the circle track world, okay, and buy virtually whatever modified stock part that you wanted to put on your race car. What you did is you went out into the stock yard and grabbed whatever parts you could pull off of any make model to make it work. So for instance, front trailing arms on this car are actually off the rear of something else. So this would have been a rear trailing arm. It would have also been straight. It's been modified they sliced it here, rotated it, got in the position they wanted, put a gusset in it, did some welding, and there it rolls. Front axle. This is a straight axle vehicle. It is not independent. It's going to have some challenges in modern world as far as transferring weight, because you have one stiff member between the right side and the left side, and they can't move independently, obviously. We're going to try to make them work because this is what was on it. Now you can see here that the shock perch, so for instance, in our going through and trying to understand how things were working, at one point in time, the spring would have came up here, and then there would have been a rod across here, and your transverse spring would have been mounted to this. So we have some new ones. So we're going to be switching over to these that have that perch removed. Now also, this initially probably didn't have any kind of shock absorber. It would have used at best like a friction shock. And it would also locate it differently. So there is basically a tie rod welded to the axle, and that is where our shocks will locate. Now this will all become a little more clear as we start putting things on the vehicle. Now, normally I would try to go through and say, all right, well, here's where we're headed and this is how we're going to do it. You know what, frankly, I don't know. So the challenge is going to be getting everything mocked up on the car. I am going to go through and change everything, and then at the end of the day, I'll tell you how we did it or why we got to where we're at. I don't want to forget leaf springs. So this is also a front leaf. This 37 Ford would have been a transverse leaf mounted vehicle, I believe. So it would not have been a coil. And what was set up in this initially, and we're going to utilize, are two independent short leaf springs. They're mounted in the center, and then they obviously pivot along this line to give you some suspension. Now, in normal fashion of a circle track car, it utilizes screw jacks. To this day, even NASCAR has screw jacks in them. And what it does is it allows you to set your ride height. Typically speaking, you'll have the right front corner slightly higher than the left, somewhere between, say, a ½ inch to an inch. And then likewise, your back end will be the same way. So the back right rear will be slightly higher than the right front, and then the left rear will be higher than kind of all of it. That's the way you set attitude up for circle track on dirt. Asphalt is not the same. And this is set up, so for instance here, what they were doing, this, like I said, pivots in here, this screw jack runs down, hits the spring, and this gives you some position. Now, my concern is with the 440 block setting in the hole and it on basically the springs, I was able to jump up and down on it fiercely and only move the front end about eighth of an inch. So yeah, that much is how much the frame moved. And that will not, it'll cause it'll basically just skate right across the track. So it will not bite in and stick and turn. It'll just slide right on up, as they say, a push on the front end. So what I'm going to do is give myself some tuning. So not only can I move this screw jack up and down to set my ride height, but I'm also going to provide some other spaces so I can preload this spring. So I'm going to give myself some adjustability, and we'll figure out what makes sense when we get to the point where we can drive the car and spin around in circles. Well, in the way we want to go, not just spin out. So that's the plan with the leaf springs, with all the bars and tie rods and trailing arms and all that jazz with the front suspension. And then our steering box will probably need a seal. And like I said, we're going to roll time lapse from here, and then we'll catch up at the end. When you're welding on nuts or a threaded item, put a bolt inside of it. That way when it cools, heats and cools, you won't distort the threads. All right, so we're going through our puzzle here of pieces and getting things put back together. You can see I went through and I welded this Franklin hub to the spindle just so it's similar to this one. I'm not dealing with some bolts over here. And then also have brand new bushings in there for the kingpins. And as you can see, I took these over to Thurlby's and had Mike go through with a hone and basically ream or hone them in lines, line hone them so they so our pins, kingpins will fit down in there nice. So they're ready to go on. So that's where I'm headed. I got my axle in there. I got to make a couple little adjustments, but we'll get the spindles up on the axle here at some point, and then obviously the axle into the hole so we can continue our mock-up. Well, it's the end of the day and we've got everything mocked up. So I want to go through this pretty quick and explain kind of where I'm at and some of the challenges I see with the pieces that we have, but it will be what it is. So here we go. We have our front suspension fully in here. We have these modified trailing arms. We have a straight axle. We have 2 independent leaf springs. We've already made our adjustments screw as far as we've added some adjustment holes. So that's getting underway. Now, one of the big challenges I see is the suspension in itself and how we're going to make it basically be free and move real nicely. One area in particular is this steering arm. As it comes over, it must be bent or something, but it is not square to our spring. So right now it's already bound up as we have it sitting here. So I need to come up with a way to probably heat this up and get that bent into position a little better. Next item I see is relative to the shocks. Where they're sitting is not bad as far as the angle is concerned. I like that they're straight up and down on the front. And I think I'll raise this side up just a little bit so I have a little more travel on the right side. But either way, I have a hard interference right here to this neck. So I got to redo this whole piece as far as getting this kind of suspended out. So that's a challenge. I need to make some bushings here and there to get everything tightened up and be able to lock it down. I mean, right now everything is loose. So those are the big pieces, and we'll go through that in excruciating detail the next time around. But for right now, I got it mocked up. That was my goal, and already started putting some pieces together. So we're moving right along here quite well. And with that, it's gonna be a wrap for today. And like always, these projects don't get done by themselves, because trust me, I've tried and it just doesn't work. I've got loads of them at home, and no matter how many times I come home from work, they're still staring me in the face, and the only way they get done is by me getting out there and working on them. So unless you got a crystal ball and a genie in it, get out there, get your work done. See you next time.